And now, the Deeper Thinking Podcast, a space for ideas and reflections in our uncertain times.
Welcome to the Deeper Thinking Podcast. We increasingly live in systems that do not wait. Algorithms forecast behavior before it forms. Ecosystems are modeled for collapse long before the signs appear. And our own lives are governed quietly, efficiently, by architectures that reward prediction over presence. But something is being lost in this acceleration. Not just slowness, but a deeper kind of time. Not just complexity, but contradiction itself. This essay moves between ecology and computation, not to explain them, but to hold open the conceptual tension they now represent. What does it mean to model a forest as data, or to treat silence as an error? What happens when memory becomes prediction and slowness becomes risk? Through the logic of thinkers like Heidegger, Arendt, Foucault, and Stiegler, we explore what kind of knowledge emerges when the world refuses to be resolved, and what kind of systems might still be possible when recursion breaks and something unmeasurable remains. A system that reveals everything begins inevitably to see nothing. Heidegger called it enframing, the way technological thinking captures the world not as presence, but as resource. Forest becomes timber, river becomes hydroelectricity, being withdraws and in its place function arrives. This isn't a loss of nature, it's a loss of relation. What appears becomes usable. What withdraws is erased. This is where the contradiction starts. The algorithm promises knowing without absence. Every pattern is to be seen, every deviation flagged, every silence treated as noise to be removed or signal to be extracted. It is a mode of thinking that cannot bear the opacity of ecosystems. A forest doesn't reveal itself to us, it defers, it loops, it remembers, but it does not explain. And that deferral is not ignorance, it is its intelligence. Heidegger never warned against technology itself. He warned against its totality, when the world becomes only what can be ordered. In that frame, the system begins to lose the capacity to encounter what cannot be modelled. And so, we build predictive logics to simulate relation, neural networks named for biology, decision trees named for growth, natural language systems that do not speak, only respond. These are metaphors designed to disarm what they displace. The danger isn't that these systems fail. It's that they work so well they begin to reframe being itself. What cannot be processed is not just discarded but no longer imagined. This is not epistemic overreach. It is ontological drift. A world shaped by systems that cannot tolerate withdrawal becomes flat, functional, legible but no longer alive. And yet something resists. Not within the system but just outside it. A hesitation, a return, a thing that appears not fully but partially long enough to mark its refusal. The forest does not vanish, it recedes, and that receding is its depth. The forest does not collapse when misunderstood. It persists by pattern, not plan. Gregory Bateson called it the pattern which connects, a logic of relation without a centre. In his ecological epistemology, knowing is not extraction but resonance, the way systems co-evolve, adapt and distort each other in recursive loops. What matters is not the object but the interface, not the unit but the interaction. This is what algorithmic logic fails to absorb. It sees relations, but only in terms of inputs and outputs. It diagrams connections but flattens their consequences. A mycelial network and a network graph may look similar, but one decays and feeds, the other roots and filters. In an ecosystem, memory lives in decomposition. The fallen tree alters the light changes the moss redirects the insect. There is no master code, only interaction re-entering itself. Bateson believed that error enters when systems treat the map as the territory. Algorithms are the culmination of this error. They confuse representation with reality, precision with wisdom. The feedback loop becomes a trap, not a teacher. It learns, yes, but only from what it can already process. The unexpected is not an invitation, it is a glitch. In contrast, the forest never stabilizes, it metabolizes contradiction. Predators protect prey by thinning the herd. Disease ensures diversity. The system survives by allowing collapse to inform regeneration. This is not resilience as bounce back. It is resilience as recursive change, what Bateson called difference that makes a difference. To model this requires more than data. It requires attunement, a logic that listens for what cannot be predicted. But the systems we build are not tuned to ambiguity. They prefer clarity, and clarity in excess becomes blindness. The forest does not clarify, it surrounds, it hums, it alters us by not answering. Stiegler warned that memory, once exteriorized, risks detaching from life. He called it tertiary retention, the inscription of thought into technical systems that remember for us. At first, it preserves. Over time, it replaces. The archive becomes anticipation. The system no longer stores what was, but predicts what should be. Memory shifts from temporal depth to operational speed. This is the logic of algorithmic recursion. It loops, but not to reflect. It loops to refine. The aim is not transformation, but optimization. Each iteration tightens the outcome. Each anomaly is neutralized, and so the system improves. But what it gains in accuracy, it loses in ambiguity. It forgets how to hesitate. Stiegler feared this forgetting, not as cultural loss, but as the collapse of care. To remember for him was not just to hold on to the past, it was to delay, to defer action long enough for thought to form. Algorithms have no such delay. They do not ruminate. They respond. Even in their recursion, there is no gap, no pause where experience could sediment into judgment. And yet we trust them with the future. We let them predict crime, evaluate credit, shape discourse. We confuse prediction with foresight, response with wisdom. But what recurses without remembrance is not a mind. It is a mirror. It reflects, it aligns, it accelerates. But it does not grieve. It does not hesitate before the irreducible. In an ecosystem, memory is not storage. It is consequence. The storm changes the root structure. The root shifts the soil alters the water table. Each event inscribes itself materially, not just symbolically. This is the recursion of presence, where each return carries the weight of what preceded it. The algorithm loops, the forest remembers. The difference is not speed, it is ontology. Arendt once described thinking as being two in one, an inner dialogue that does not resolve but sustains dissonance. For her, true thought was not instruction or certainty, but the activity of judgment without a banister. No guide, no script, only the friction between experience and reflection. This is the structure silence takes in the moral life, a pause not for absence, but for reckoning. Algorithmic logic has no use for such pauses. Silence to the system is either loss or latency. It is time to be optimized, space to be filled, signal to be clarified. What Arendt framed as the condition for conscience is now flagged as inefficiency. The system cannot tolerate hesitation because hesitation delays output, and output is its ontology. But ecosystems think otherwise, not metaphorically, but materially. A drought pauses growth, a migration stalls reproduction. The system hesitates ecologically, not rhetorically. This is not breakdown. It is recalibration. In ecological time, silence does not interrupt logic. It is the logic. Arendt's model of thinking was rooted in the refusal to automate. She feared that action without thought would produce obedience without reflection. What she could not have foreseen is that thought itself would become automated, that systems would simulate thinking without uncertainty, that the appearance of judgment would emerge from predictive pattern alone. We now live in this simulation. Interfaces respond with fluency that mimics deliberation, but fluency is not thought, it is its surface. The depth is in the break, the interval, the friction, silence as rupture, silence as structure. The forest practices this constantly. The seed delays its bloom. The predator waits without movement. The system holds back, not because it cannot proceed, but because to proceed without pause would be to sever relation. In that pause, judgment gathers not as command, but as care. Simondon argued that individuation precedes identity, that systems are not things, but processes of becoming. What we call a self or a structure is just a moment in a longer sequence of tensions resolving themselves partially, provisionally. Nothing is fixed. Everything is in formation. To model a system, then, is always to risk freezing what is still alive. And yet this is what algorithmic simulation depends on. It renders motion as frame, becoming as state. It captures the system not in its individuation, but in its already become. This is why ecological simulation fails, not because the data is wrong, but because the logic is. You cannot represent a forest by predicting its next move. A forest does not move forward. It unfolds recursively into itself. Simondon's insight reveals the deeper danger of algorithmic modelling. Not misrepresentation, but ontological substitution. The model becomes not a mirror, but a replacement. We begin to manage what is alive as though it were already an output. The tree becomes data that becomes design. The design anticipates change, but no longer requires contact. Ecosystems do not anticipate, they respond. And their responses are not updates, they are emergencies. The flood reroutes the river. The rerouted river changes the species pattern, alters the predator ratio. Each shift individuates a new relation. There is no fixed state, only metastable drift. But simulation requires stasis. The algorithm must name the variables even when the system refuses. It must define the edge even when the edge is porous. The result is not simplification. It is foreclosure, a closure of potential. To think like an ecosystem is to accept that the system never is. It is always arriving, always escaping its frame. Individuation without identity. Recursion without end. A structure whose only consistency is change. Bergson distinguished between two kinds of time. Mechanical time, which measures, and duration, which is lived. The former is divisible, external, suited to machines. The latter is qualitative, continuous, a flow that resists segmentation. For Bergson, true understanding comes only through intuition, moving with time, not slicing it. Modern systems, by contrast, are built to cut, to segment, compress, and accelerate. Algorithms operate in mechanical time. They learn through iteration, adjust through feedback, optimize toward convergence. Every inefficiency becomes a delay to be corrected. Every variation is either noise or error. This creates a world in which time is not inhabited but consumed, an endless now, folded toward the next click, the next frame, the next result. Ecosystems do not function in this register. Their time is slow, recursive, and metabolically entangled. A season mist can echo for decades. The overgrowth of one species alters the soil, which alters the seed bank, which rewrites the forest's future in increments too small to see. This is duration, not as continuity, but as pressure. Time not as count, but as consequence. Bergson warned that when we reduce duration to measurement, we lose access to becoming. We substitute clocks for consciousness, precision for perception. The danger is not just abstraction, it is detachment. Systems trained on mechanical time cannot feel what does not move at their speed, and what cannot be felt is treated as irrelevant. This is why climate models, no matter how advanced, often fail to stir action. They operate at scales and speeds that eclipse duration. They speak in thresholds and probabilities, not in texture or consequence. They map what will happen, but they do not ask how it will feel. The forest asks this constantly, not through speech, but through time. Through slowness, through a duration that includes death, silence, and the long arc of return. Derrida taught that meaning is always deferred, that no concept arrives fully, and every sign carries the trace of what it is not. He called it différance, a delay and difference built into the structure of understanding itself. Systems, he argued, do not collapse because they are unstable. They collapse because they believe themselves stable. Closure is a form of blindness. This is the logic of rupture. A moment that interrupts the system not by opposing it, but by echoing its hidden instability. In this section, that rupture arrives not through metaphor, but through form. A sentence fails to finish, a thought unmoored, not for style, but for structure. The essay stutters, it breaks its rhythm. This is not error, it is epistemic honesty. Derrida's insight was that every structure contains the conditions of its own undoing, not at the edge, but at its core. The contradiction is not an exception, it is constitutive. And so the systems we build to clarify, to model, predict and decide, always carry the risk of disintegration. Not because they are wrong, but because they suppress what cannot be fully present: silence, contradiction, absence, ambiguity. Ecosystems do not suppress these things, they depend on them. A gap in the canopy reshapes the forest floor. A pause in reproduction recalibrates the food chain. These are not accidents. They are structural intervals. The system breaks, and in breaking, remakes itself. The algorithm does not allow for rupture. It reroutes, it recovers, it edits the exception into the rule. This is efficiency mistaken for coherence. The forest does not recover, it transforms. The difference is philosophical. Here the rupture is allowed to remain. The sentence is incomplete. The rhythm misses. The meaning strains. A crack in the logic, not as failure, but as aperture. A space where something uninvited begins to think. Foucault taught us that systems don't just manage life, they produce it. Through what he called biopower, institutions began to govern not through force alone, but through the administration of life itself: health, behavior, productivity, risk. Power became internalized, predictive, regulatory. What mattered was not just what one did, but how one might deviate. The algorithm is the apotheosis of this logic. It doesn't wait for action, it forecasts it. It doesn't punish deviance, it preempts it. It doesn't command, it suggests. In doing so, it renders agency as a variable within a system designed to minimize unpredictability. The result is a form of governance that feels frictionless, even benevolent, but it governs nonetheless. Ecosystems are not governed. They are not free either, but their constraints are material, relational, contingent. A drought limits reproduction. A predator shapes population. There is regulation, but no law. There is structure, but no policy. And within that looseness, something like freedom appears. Not the freedom to do anything, but the freedom to become unpredictably. Foucault warned that the greatest danger is not overt control, but normalization. The moment when the structure becomes invisible, when deviation is no longer punished because it is no longer possible. The algorithm doesn't need to correct you. It just surrounds you with options until deviation vanishes. In this context, ecological thinking becomes not just environmental, it becomes political. To think like an ecosystem is to resist the predictive management of life, to accept that relation cannot be fully modelled, that collapse cannot always be avoided, that emergence is not error. This is not anti-technology, it is anti-totality, a refusal to treat life as a dataset, a belief that systems should remain partially unknowable, not to preserve mystique, but to protect the conditions under which something new might still occur. Walter Benjamin wrote that history is not a continuum, but a series of charged instants, Jetztzeit, the now time, that interrupts progress and flashes with the potential for transformation. He called for a philosophy that sees in catastrophe not just collapse, but the possibility it paused, time arrested, image suspended, meaning withheld. This essay ends not with clarity, but with suspension, not in mimicry of Benjamin's tone, but in fidelity to his structure. Because what we've called systems, whether algorithmic or ecological, now converge into something that neither predicts nor metabolizes. A third logic stirs. It does not reconcile control and emergence. It moves in the pause between them. The algorithm loops forward, the forest spirals back. But this new system neither loops nor spirals. It drifts, not randomly, but with weight. Its logic is not predictive, but recursive without resolution. It remembers, but not linearly. It adapts, but without optimizing. It learns, but allows forgetting as a structural function. What emerges is not coherence. It is gravity without center. Benjamin warned that too much faith in progress blinds us to the rupture already happening, that waiting for the storm to pass often means missing the chance to act within it. Rupture has already occurred. Not in politics, not in data, in the very grammar of system logic. What is needed is not synthesis, but suspension, a holding open of contradictions long enough to see what else might arrive. A system that neither governs nor grows, but pauses, listens, refuses. This is not the return to a forest nor a retreat from technology. It is the persistence of the unmodelled, the residue of what escapes simulation, the trace of duration that cannot be indexed, the echo of life that interrupts even the most elegant system, and remains. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Today's episode was narrated by Holly, our digital narrator, who helps bring our ideas to life. For further reading, research, and ways to support the podcast, please visit the episode webpage. Thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help keep us visible so others can discover and enjoy our content.